We are live.
All right, we're live. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us for DGG Presents Random Encounters. We're going to be talking world building this week, and we have Brian with us as always, Bjark the Bard. Go ahead and give your little spiel about where they can find you real quick before we talk about our other guest.
Yeah, sure. So I am Brian. I write over on Bjark the Bard. You can find me all over the internet with the moniker Bjark the Bard. Right over on my website, bjarkthebard.com, sharing GM tips to help you improve. That.
Oh. All right, and then joining us today, someone that does a lot of world building. If you've followed them on any of the many socials out there, and so I took a chance, reached out, and asked if they wanted to join us for a conversation today, and they said yes. So, Jack, take it away.
Howdy, howdy. I am Jack Kellum, also known as @JackGogsbane on Twitter, Jack the Giant Killer, proprietor of Gods and Game Masters. I have a huge list of projects and things I do, so you're better off just looking at my bio on Twitter or the list of links on my website. I will give you some of these links in the chat as we're going on, but I'm not going to spend all day talking about it because we have world building to discuss, and that's my jam.
All right, so yeah, check out the links that he's going to be dropping. If you've got anything, if you have any questions about world building, drop them in the chat, and we'll kind of hit on them as we go throughout. But yeah, we're just going to go ahead and kind of dive in here. So I didn't really mention it beforehand, but it's just kind of free form, Jack. So when you got something to say, just kind of jump in. But first thing,
no worries. I talk easy.
First thing, we're going to start real basic in case some people wonder exactly, but what are we talking about when we say world building?
That's a fun question, and it means different things to different people. But for me, it has to do with the whole depth of the thing, right? World building for me starts with Tolkien as the inspiration as to how deep you want to get. World building is the languages of whatever world or setting you're writing fiction in or running a TTRPG in, sci-fi, fantasy, whatever. Cultures, societies, languages, the various ethnicities and or species involved, depending on your perspective on how that interacts. The flora and fauna, all of the biology of the world, sometimes even the ecology of the world, how the various creatures interact with it and how they interact with one another, the weather, the geology, all of these things have effects on the cultures that develop in those areas. And if you put them in the wrong place, it's going to stand out like a sore thumb. And people won't necessarily know why. They just know it doesn't fit. And if it doesn't, then you come up with some cool reason why they did it that way anyway. If you do that on purpose, it can work out. But world building is the sum total of your knowledge of how the world you're using for gaming or writing is put together. And the more you have, even if it never comes up in your game, the deeper your games will be. My perspective.
Don, Brian, anything to add to that general consensus before we dive into more specific things?
Yeah.
No, I think you go ahead. I was going to say you hit the nail on the head. You covered everything. Just my one note is I know that I focus on some of the micro details. So big thing for me is what kind of goods is an area producing, specifically what kind of crops are they growing, what kind of are they hunting, are they farming, and most importantly, what are they eating and drinking?
Those are all really critical issues. You want to know all those things because the food they eat, the things they drink, not only do these change their culture, they can be the foundation of it.
Exactly. Oh, yeah, totally.
So I totally agree with all that.
Yeah, all I was going to add is some of this can sound pretty overwhelming to new GMs. So I was just going to point out that it's a good idea to, well, start defining that. It's good to start small first.
Yeah, that's.
I come at that. I come
Go
at
ahead.
that from two different directions. While I'm not going to disagree that for your first few forays, all you really need is to build a town, right? You start with a town, you start with the people of that town and some idea of how it works. And, you know, you're going to need a tavern, probably a church, whoever the authorities are, etc. All that's in my GM tips for session 0, session 4, beginners, session 0 and session 1 on my website. Session 0 just talks about not freaking out and, you know, go to other people for the safety tools. Plenty of people have done that.
Yep.
Remember to have fun. Here's your really important beginner tips. Session 0, once again, have fun, but here's the things to cover other than the safety tools. Again, other people have handled those better. And then in the session 1, I go, I know you're going to think I'm going to tell you have everything built because that's how I come across in all my other articles, but nah, for the first section of your game, here's the things you need. That's it. It's really tiny. But when it comes to what I call easy mode world building, I actually, at the very beginning, even before I get to a town, I want to start at the very top. And by very top, I mean the Pantheon, if it's a fantasy series.
That was going to be my question.
And that is where I
that lost
start.
Jeff.
And
Okay.
the demonstrated,
Oh.
though I demonstrated in my series of videos on YouTube, starting with my world building series, starting with gods, filing off the serial numbers, because you can create an entire pantheon very quickly without a whole lot of work, as long as you just change the names to protect the guilty. Because other people have had a wide variety of gods across human existence.
Mm-hmm.
You're not going to make up wholesale better ones or more interesting ones in any, not easily make up better ones or more interesting ones than the ones we already have. So what you do is you find the ones you really like from mythology, especially if they're from different pantheons. Grab them, throw them together, mix it up, and see what happens. Change the names, change whatever you have to keep them from being too obvious or offending any actual believers, and then you're good to go.
Mm-hmm.
And you can very quickly get a pantheon that way. And I also I go through it with the notion of, okay, we're building this pantheon specifically for D&D, right? So you want at least one guy of each alignment. You'll want to make sure all the domains are covered, et cetera, et cetera. And then I actually take almost all of the gods in the pantheon are from different pantheons.
Gotcha.
The king of the gods in my setting of Rhaega, which kind of got out of control and became a real thing rather than just an example I was making. It was just supposed to be the example of easy world building, but it kind of got out of control and became a real thing. The king of the gods, just as an example, is based on Thor.
Okay.
Rather than being based on Zeus, even though it's a Greco-Roman style pantheon, he's based on what if Thor wasn't dumb or Zeus wasn't a douchebag.
Yeah. Yeah. Kind of a more hardcore paternal style deity.
Right. But hardcore paternal style, but actually honorable and strong, rather than demanding honor from you and possessing none himself.
Yeah.
In the way that Zeus very often behaved.
Yeah. Zeus was a douche.
Yeah. But like the moon gods, I've got 2 of them, and they're both from Japanese mythology.
Okay.
I used Inari and Tsukiyomi, and they became Vulpos, the fox god, god of transitions and transformation, and Lunos, the moon itself, who is ever changing and never the same. And
okay.
What's really cool about that is both of those in actual Japanese mythology are non-binary to begin with, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Or rather, they are portrayed as both male and female, depending.
Yeah.
So I have them both as specifically and explicitly non-binary in the setting, where basically Vulpos is the explicitly the god of transness and transitions because they are literally always actually whatever they've turned into.
I see.
They have no true form.
Yeah. They're very
So they are
Protean.
male, they are female, they are this gender, they are that gender, they are this sex, they are that sex, they appear this way, they appear that way. They are all those things. And they are legitimately whatever they have chosen to be. Whereas Lunos is non-binary in an agender, asexual way.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Anyway, and it was just interesting grabbing the gods from a lot of different places. Like my Forge god is based on Bridget from the Irish myths.
Mm-hmm.
The Queen of the Gods is actually based on Asherah, the wife of the original wife of the Hebrew god.
Mm-hmm.
Things like that. The sun god looks a lot like Apollo, but is actually based on Nergal, who was a solar and underworld deity from Mesopotamian myths.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I know about them.
And when you take them and you put all those together, one of the reasons I start there is then you can just go, well, what kind of a world would they build?
Yeah.
Role play the gods and make the world. And then you have a creation myth too.
Yeah.
That is a good tip. You kind of dove headfirst right into the first thing I was going to suggest we talk about, which was pantheons and religions.
Mm-hmm.
See, I always
to give a base, so you kind of jumped right in there, and I like that little tip at the end about role playing as the gods to give you like world creation myth.
See,
and it doesn't just give you your creation myth; it gives you how the world will develop. When you've decided at the beginning, talking about pantheons and religions, even before you pick the gods, there's a very crucial question you have to answer: is it true?
Yep.
Are those really the gods? Did they make them? And there's 3 answers, not 2. It's not a binary question. 1, yes, they did. 2, no, they didn't, and they're lying about it. 3, maybe we think they did, but they don't talk to us.
Yep.
In Rega, I chose because it was the easy mode, I chose the easiest option, which is the gods are real. They have told you what they want you to do, and they get mad when you don't. All of the gods you actually worship are good gods, and they're all part of a pantheon. The 3 evil gods are not part of their pantheon. They are in total opposition to the pantheon.
I see.
And not part of the religion. But whence cometh evil? Those guys.
Makes sense.
And there's only 3 of them, but individually, any one of them is more powerful than any one of the good guys, except maybe Savios. So they can make evil things happen, and the good gods can't necessarily stop them without endangering the world they're on. So.
All right. What you got, Don?
I was just going to say, yeah, no. I was just going to say, one of the things that I'm surprised none of my players have figured out quite yet is that the pantheon in the majority of the settings I run is dead. And the only thing that's actually driving like cleric abilities is the faith the clerics have. And using a dying or dead pantheon where the world is completely changed, and it's almost like this projected delusion that's, carrying the flame of hope. But then you start carving out an interesting world.
Indeed. And if at that point the people with the faith manage to get more people with faith, but realize that the faith itself is the source of power, then you have a transition in mindset.
Yep.
And then you start having new gods.
Yep, exactly.
Because in worlds where gods exist, there's kind of there's a slot. You like serotonin receptors in your brain. And once it's empty, something else needs to go in there. Yeah, in a lot of settings, the world malfunctions while those gods are missing.
Yeah.
Which can be a driving force. I'm sure it is for you. It's a driving force for a whole bunch of plot, for a whole bunch of bad things happening because the world's malfunctioning. The gods aren't there to stop it.
Yeah, it's almost like the twilight days of the world unless they figure out ways to overcome this problem.
Oh, yeah. In one of the settings I haven't gotten to run yet, which I'm straight up calling After Ragnarok, it's a world pretty much like the Viking Age Scandinavia. But in this setting, and I don't even know which system I'm using, if any, in this particular setting, all the gods have died. Ragnarok has happened. Midgard, however, inexplicably has not burned or been destroyed. It's still stuck in the Fimbulvinter, and it's overrun by giants and the undead because there are gods to stop them.
So it's just like slowly marching to that end.
Right. And then these PCs pop up in this world with no memory of who they are or where they're from.
Ooh.
And they're like,
Well, I like where this is going.
Right. Yeah. But I like that idea that, you know, a fallen pantheon's really great for establishing, kind of like I said, the Twilight years. And that way you can kind of build in a lot of plot devices that make it feel really visceral.
There's I think it's a Monty Cook Games supplement, Godfallen?
Godfall, I think. Yeah, I think I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, it's a game where and also Godbound, which is a kind of an OSR game as well. And the concept in both of these is the gods are dead, but the PCs have got some of their divine spark.
Gotcha.
And they're trying to make it to godhood and compete with other people with parts of the spark. And it kind of has a Highlander I Am Immortal feel to it because you're stealing each other's sparks and the rest of that mess.
Oh, I see. That's pretty neat. Yeah. Sorry, we're getting like off on this massive pantheon.
That's okay. I've got a plan. I figured something like this was going to happen. So apologize for me eating. I'm, you know, like
no worries.
But
I was just thinking, like, yeah, Pantheon's a good place to start. One of the first things I do when I'm building a starter town is I usually use the rule of 3, where I have like 3 levels of political influence that are occurring. That way, if players are like, what's happening locally, regionally, and kind of vaguely the kingdom, but really from the ground level. Yeah, from the ground level, the majority of what's going on at the king or kingdom level or regency level is not going to be anything that's going to matter to the, you know, the commoners.
And in some cases, and it's definitely in a case that I'm going to be working on very soon, it can be fun to have there not be anything really that they're aware of beyond the regional level.
Exactly.
Because if the kingdom, whatever kingdoms or empires, if you're at the end of one of those or in one of the quote unquote dark age periods after the fall of some big area, which most D&D at least, and many other fantasy role-playing games as well are by default, whether they know it or not.
Yeah, they're all post-apocalyptic. I had this argument.
Right.
Many times.
You are absolutely correct, because otherwise, where do all these ruins come from? Why are there so many magic items hidden? Why are we less capable of making these magic items than they were back then?
Yeah, why go dungeon delving if you can just manufacture them?
Correct.
Yeah.
Because you can't.
Yeah, exactly. It's lost tech.
So this is definitely a good segue into the next thing, which you guys jumped on a little bit already again. So you guys it's almost like you're just reading my mind a little bit here. But talking about government and establishments, people in power, how important are these to your world in general?
It's an adventure. It's an engine for adventure.
Are they necessary?
It's always important whether you know it or not. And it's going to have effects on your world.
Yep.
Whether you planned for it or not.
Exactly.
So you're better off planning for it. At the very least, you have got to know what the power centers are in your starting town.
Yep.
Okay. Even if we're starting at the smallest scale, like we've talked about. Okay, you know basically who your gods are. Maybe you've even only done the 1 or 2 local gods they worship. Yep. At the minimum, you need that, right? If they don't worship whole pantheon, which some cultures would and some cultures wouldn't.
Yeah.
You need to know in that town who's the mayor or the equivalent. You know, the alderman, the leader of the council, however it works. You need to know how it works. A lot of small villages are covered by a village council of some kind, which isn't necessarily officially elected. It's usually just the people who are the most respected get together and make the decisions. You got almost always the miller.
Yep.
Almost always the smith.
Yep.
A priest.
And
if there's only one priest, then it's the priest. The oldest, wisest woman in town.
Yeah. Usually a trapper of some sort, too, that knows the surrounding area.
Usually at least one person who is very familiar with the outer area. So you're looking at least a 5-person council.
Yep.
And that will be the case even if there is an officially elected
That's
authority who may not be any of those people.
Yeah, that's the only way they can keep control, especially in a close-knit town.
Right. Now, control isn't all that necessary in a close-knit town, because close-knit towns, if you've got less than 100 people, especially, that's the only scale at which pure communism can work.
Yep.
Because you know everybody and you care about them, which means you're going to do for them and they're going to do for you, and nobody cares what it costs.
Yeah, it's the
Once
same.
you get over about 100 people, humans are no longer capable of thinking about all of those people as individuals. They think of them as abstractions, and they are not inclined to do things for them on a general basis. I'm aware there are exceptions. My one of my partners is very much one of them and gives to everybody. But on a general basis, you only do things without altruistically for those you see as part of your tribe.
Yeah.
Right?
Your local group. Yeah. Because the human brain can't see things at that scale beyond 100.
Yeah.
It's just...
and once you get to that level, you're going to start categorizing people, and they could be well categorized as part of your tribe just because they share something in common with you, even though you don't know them.
Mm-hmm.
Thus, the big tribalism problems we have in the United States and elsewhere. Because I don't even know this guy, but he's a blah, 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 and I am also blah, 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 blah. Therefore, we are,
brothers.
Because it's a category of person rather than rather than actually seeing a person. But when you're dealing with small villages, you still will have people that have to make decisions, not because they need control, but because people will want to have someone else make the decision. They will go to someone else to find out what they should do. I need an adult. You are an adult. I need an adultier adult. They will look for the adultier adult, and that's when you get the 5 people they go to.
The people that won't shy away from making the big decisions.
Right.
Because they're not afraid of the responsibility.
God bless it. I will take the responsibility. Not authority. Not power. Responsibility. They are given authority because they will accept responsibility at the village level. Fundamentally speaking. It gets formalized the bigger you get. And the more dangerous the outside world gets. Because nobles become noble because they need the time and money to pay for weapons and training to fight the other people who have weapons and training to protect the people who are making the food. And that's where nobles come from being the biggest, baddest dude around at first.
Or having enough.
Gentleman means I never work with my hands. I have no calluses other than sword and saddle.
Or they have enough friends to carve out their own nobility.
Right. And generally that's going to still be the same thing because those friends will look to the strongest person to be their war leader. That war leader becomes the noble. Then over generations, it becomes a hereditary situation.
So one of the things with these governments, hierarchies, and all that comes into play, and Brian, I'm going to toss this question to you first, is like, what is a big benefit of having this in place? Like for you, what is the biggest benefit of having this in place for a world?
One of the reasons I really like building out a government and having a government set up, be it at a village level, a city level, or an overall level, is, as we said before, it does really shape a campaign and how the world is going to interact. But one of the things I like to do the most, which I feel like is a somewhat older trope that gets used a lot, is what happens when said government becomes corrupt in some way. So, what if in this dangerous world this line of individuals have been the mayor of the town because a while ago there was a mayor with an iron fist that ruled, that pushed out the shadows, was the strongest. But slowly but surely, as generations went on and they just always trusted that name, they got individuals that saw it and saw it less as a duty to protect their people and more of a I can control things.
The three
I can
elements
keep
of
the
an empire.
I can keep the people who want to push me out of power out of the way. And it starts with little bits, but eventually you get a situation that a bunch of adventurers will roll in, and while they might be used to the world as it is, you have a bunch of players that will smell it a mile away and go, there's something wrong here, and that is like honey.
Yep.
I found
It
I
absolutely
have
is.
yet to make a corrupt town that my players have not gone into and gone, let's see what we can do about this. Oh, the guards are bullying people. Oh,
What can be fun is in a smaller village situation, say the corruption has just started, and it started with the best of intentions. In my setting of Morgravia, which was a Pathfinder 1 setting where I was using the horror adventures book and all this, I literally had the son of the town mayor, the son of the burgermeister. His name was literally Gaston, right? And he's just like Gaston from Beauty and the Beast. And then they find out that he has become this great hunter because he made a deal with Barbatos, the lord of the first plane of hell, so that he could gain the power to protect his town from all the monsters around.
That's great. Yeah,
again, that never would have been as clear if I hadn't figured out who was in power and why they were in power and what they were willing to do and why. And there were multiple different levels of power because their official lord had died about 500 years ago and it's a vampire in that castle over there.
Yeah.
But it still was a matter of he's still a power center,
Yeah.
So I definitely agree with that. But even more at the low level, most of the time that power structure or some part of it, like the village wise woman or whatever, those are going to be your first quest givers too. Those are going to be the people. Oh, sorry. The other one is the innkeeper.
Yep.
It's not the same as the miller. The innkeeper is very often going to be.
That is huge
because they're the information hub,
and very often they are the mayor. The inn, if the town's not big enough to have a town hall, the inn is the town hall.
Yep.
People are like, "Oh, you meet at the inn. Oh, you meet at the tavern." That trope is so old and so dumb. I'm like, no, because
there's a reason for that.
It works for a reason. Yes.
In most small communities, it literally is the center of that community. That's where people are. That's where they would go for help because they know there are people there.
Yep, exactly.
So, oh no, Billy staggered in screaming about somebody falling down a well is legit because that's where they would go.
Yep. Because that's where you'd find.
Yes. Oh,
that is literally how I started my actual play in the Successor States of Rhaegar. I had a kid run into the tavern and exclaim to all and sundry that this person had gone missing after letting the players interact for a good 45 minutes to establish who they were, because that's the other good thing for taverns.
Yes.
It kicked everything off because that's legitimately where people would end up going. And that's something that gets overlooked way too much. That's why I say always build your tavern in your early world building.
Yeah.
Well, for me, like the one of the fantasy series that started me with D&D and fantasy in general was Dragonlance. And the very first book of that series, Dragons of Autumn Twilight, it starts just outside, describes the first town, describes the inn, has these friends go to the inn. You get all this description of the inn and the people in the inn and how bustling it is because of everything Jack just said. It is like the center. It is the focal point. This is where people in this town go to socialize.
It's the end of the last home, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, end of the last home. And
I read quite a bit of Dragonlance early on. It's not my favorite setting, I have to admit. There's a lot of reasons I'm not going to get into because people will be upset at me.
They're good books.
Yeah, some of the books are good. That's one of the reasons the setting isn't as good as it should be.
Mm-hmm. I agree with that.
Because it's not a setting. It is a setting that revolves in many ways around the characters from those books.
Yep. And because of that, it's
rather
really
than revolving around your player characters.
Yep. The new campaign setting is actually pretty decent. I just got it for Christmas.
I've heard that, but I also know it makes all the old school Dragonlance fans very angry at it.
Mm-hmm. I know, but I'm an old school Dragonlance fan, and I like it.
And I appreciate that. There's a ton of old school Dragonlance fans who are very upset with it because it doesn't focus on the heroes of the Lance.
Yeah, I'm actually really good with that, though.
So
because
I have problems.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, go for it, dude.
I have some problems with the world of Dragonlance itself.
Yeah, no, I get that.
Some of the ideas are very deep, and others seem randomly opposed to the idea of anything deep or meaningful.
Yeah, you're not wrong.
Yeah.
It had a huge amount of potential, but they kind of leaned a little too hard on, shall we say, insensitive comedy relief.
Yeah, you're not wrong.
But anyway, I'm not going to get any further into that because I do like a lot of people who play Dragonlance, and it has many good things about it as well.
No, I like the revamped setting. But
Oh, go for it, Don.
I was going to say, one thing that I like thinking about when it comes to politics is one of the really important ones is the region at war? And if it isn't, why not? Because war is the natural state of historical human society.
It is.
So in order for their peace to be, there must be a few really powerful people working their butts off. So
somebody's working very hard to keep the peace. It's not a matter of somebody being angry enough to start a war. It's why aren't you at war right now?
Another thing.
In some cases, it's because at the village level, if that's literally all there is, there's nobody to be at war with yet.
Yeah.
You don't have exposure to them. The closest thing you are at war is, well, I'm going to go out in the wild, and now I've run into this group of insert bad guys here, bandit, goblin, whatever, and I'm going to fight them. It's not big enough scale to be a war
yet,
and you're not a big enough polity to engage in such things. But from your perspective, it's just as impactful, and it could count as a battle in a larger war if such a thing existed.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. The other thing I always try to look at is the three stages of an empire. Is usually you have the first generation, which are the conquerors, then you have the administrators, and then you have the wasters, and then it cycles again. So it's really
the three generations of rulers as well.
Yeah,
you'll have the one hyper competent ruler followed by one who's just sort of keeping it up, and usually by the third generation, unless they've been very careful, as Rome actually was for quite a while, to avoid the nepotism thing. Rome actually lasted for as long as it did because rather than simply having the children inherit, they would find someone they thought could do the job and adopt them. When they stopped doing that is when Rome really started to go downhill.
Yep. But yeah, I like using that as kind of a gauge as to if I'm using an overarching kingdom or rulership of any kind in a region, being like, okay, what stage is this empire in? Are they conquering and moving outward? Are they just administrating and benefiting from the previous generation? Or are they just wasting everything and being the usurper nobles that everybody typically hates? And so
I love
using
wasters.
that, and so
they can be a lot of fun in terms of the game.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
It just
because then you can have the PCs
I love wasters in the game.
Yeah, you can have that gives you the opportunity for, as your PCs get up to the appropriate levels, they sweep in, take the bad guy out, and suddenly they have responsibility.
Yep.
Even if they don't take the throne themselves, they are responsible for emptying it. So now they've got to do something about that.
That's always so much fun. I've had that happen twice in the most recent campaign that I'm running, where they've come in, they've seen problems, they've cleared out the problems, and then at that point I look at them and I go, so
what now?
what are you going to do now? How are you going to do things? The first time it happened, they were like representative democracy, and I was like, oh, okay, so who are you picking?
Yep,
Who
exactly.
are you? And that was a session and a half, and I would say they got about 60% good people in there, pretty good odds. Second time it was all sorts of interesting, because the one very charismatic and very politically trained warlock got a handle on things and started just going crazy with deception scores, and it's become very interesting. But yeah, that's
yeah.
One of the things
something that you go ahead.
Philosophically, I say philosophically because it's a philosopher I'm about to quote. Both Plato and Socrates believed that democracy was the second worst form of government.
Yep.
The worst form, of course, being tyranny. But they also believed that democracy was the closest to tyranny of the other types.
Yeah.
They invented the concept of aristocracy, which doesn't mean what people think it means today. It doesn't mean an established nobility. It literally means rule by those best suited to rule.
Yep.
The problem with it, sure, it is what works. Those who are best suited to rule, ruling, obviously, it's a tautology, it's going to work out, right? The problem is figuring out who that is.
Yep, and then you get interest groups that start influencing everything.
And we've discovered, haven't we, that while it's not fair or reasonable to exclude anyone from the democratic selection of who we believe is the best,
Yep.
we've also discovered we don't choose so good.
Yep. That's because the conditions of the test are wrong.
And they always will be.
Exactly.
In a democracy of any size past, once again, about 100 people.
Yep.
Yeah.
We're
then
bad
you
at
start
being big in general.
Yep.
That's my humans are bad at dealing with numbers past what they can directly see.
Yep. Or like this one Scrum business book I read said, the general rule of organizational design is that all organizational design is bad.
And that's why democracy is the worst of all possible governments except for all the rest.
Yep.
Because while we are bad at choosing, it's still better to let everyone have a voice than not.
Yeah,
Mhm.
exactly.
The problem is we have to work out some way to let everyone actually be informed enough to make good choices.
Yep. And that's extremely challenging when we can't keep
Especially with the
everybody
special
informed in
interests.
general.
Especially when you combine it with the special interests you already mentioned, who spend all of their time convincing everyone
Yep.
what they should do.
Mm-hmm.
They're not always wrong, but that's not the point. Anyway, that may seem like a digression from world building. I promise you it isn't. Because if you think about it in those terms, you will watch how every system, no matter how well intentioned it is built, can break down and provide drama, provide plot.
Yep.
It's like the reasons for all of the complicated rules in legalist China and the complicated political rules that we've literally named a type of politics after, Byzantine, was to try to find ways to limit the ways that the system can break down. But all that we did in both cases is simply provide a complicated set of rules that those who knew them could manipulate to their benefit, and those who did not know them were hurt by.
Yeah. You know, kind of like 3.5 versus 5th edition.
Yes.
Yes. If you don't ever know what you're doing in 3.5, you can easily build something that doesn't work.
Yep.
But if you know what you're doing, or at the very least you have other people in your group, GM, who are willing to help you build something good, which I've always done.
Exactly.
You can do much more interesting things. The variety is far wider.
Yeah.
But 5e is very good for ease of adaptation ease of jumping into play, getting a lot more people involved, all sorts of things.
Yeah, the barrier to entry is so much lower.
It is lower. Now, it's not the lowest, obviously. There are plenty of indie games, as we were talking about. There are plenty of indie games where the barrier is even lower. The problem is, without the marketing for people to know about them,
they're obscure.
It doesn't matter that they're easier.
Yeah, better, absolutely.
All right. So if we were going to think of like the 3 like biggest things for world building, we hit on religion, we hit on government and power structures. What do you think the other one would be?
Geography.
For me, it's the most recent cataclysmic event, but
so the third thing for me is a dovetail thing, right? It's the place where they all meet. Most recent cataclysm has a big effect on it. Geography has a big effect on it. But what you're really looking at is culture.
Yeah.
Yes.
What has been created by the religion they have, the values they have, the needs of the geography they developed in, combined with their modes of interaction and their biological constraints, whatever they are. What foods they need, et cetera, what capabilities they have, and how all these things interact, because that's where a culture comes from. And then you have that culture, and then you see how that responds to the cultures around it. If you've got 2 cultures that grow up, say, in the desert, and they're both really focused on maintaining their own resources, and because resources are scarce, taking them from their neighbors. Those 2 are going to be at war all the time, even though they have almost everything in common. I'm not making any specific reference, but look at our world for a minute and you'll figure it out. If you have 2 cultures next to each other, on the other hand, that are different in every possible way, but they both have everything they need within their own territories, they can sit there quite peacefully. The less resources any particular civilization has, the more warlike it will be. It has to be, because it has to take what it needs from somewhere else. And the most primary motivation of any biological entity is survival. Survival both of the individual and of the larger genetic group and culture, right?
Yeah.
You can see this in effect, and I don't know if a lot of people realize this is what's happening. You can see this in effect even in Europe today. Why does Russia keep attacking places? Because they do not have resources of their own. They have oil, sure, but they can't get it out to market because they don't have any actual access to water of their own. They've always had to borrow it. Some of the land they're on can be taken away at any moment by the country that actually owns it. They can't grow enough of their own food. The Ukraine was supplying them with food for almost 3 centuries. Because, of course, the Ukraine didn't just suddenly get conquered by the USSR. It was conquered by the Russian Empire before the Union of Socialist Soviet Republics came along. Without taking from people around them, they will starve. They live in what is primarily a barren, nearly unlivable wasteland, where prior to modern day, almost every city would burn down every winter.
Fair.
Because they were made of wood, because they didn't have stone to build from. And they had to burn things to keep warm. So the city would burn down. This is why they couldn't be, it's the same reason they couldn't be conquered by Germany, because they were used to dealing with this horrendous land they lived in, and nobody else was.
Yeah.
But it's the same reason they're going to try to conquer everyone around them, and they always will, until they are big enough that they have enough internal resources. For example, further back, Mongolia. Same thing. Way after wave of conquering peoples came out of those steppes. New peoples. Most of them Turkic or Mongolian in ancestry, but wave after wave, going back as far as the Scythians in pre-Roman times. Waves of horsemen coming out of that territory because they didn't have food or anything. They're going to keep coming. Because once their population surpasses their minimal resources, they must expand or move, whichever way. And since there's always people already there when you move, that becomes a war.
So something for ideas or a pool of things to look at. It's been touched on for all these big three we've talked about so far. We talked about it in religion, talked about it in government, and Jack just finished talking about it for culture as well. You can look at history to find ideas for all of this and rip it off.
You have to
rip it off from history. And the reason that works, Jack, I'm sure you'll have more to add to this, but the reason that works is because history happened because people were involved.
Yep.
And those things happen because people will be people. They will do what they do. We're wired a certain way based on a number of different things. So all these things through history, people know them. And if you take a different spin on it and reskin it, it's going to be relatable and it's going to make sense.
Mm-hmm.
I will go so far as to say you are far better off specifically, intentionally taking pieces of history or pieces of a culture and using it. Because you're going to, whether you mean to or not.
Yep.
You don't have anywhere else to get it from but what you know of the world. You're going to steal something. You're going to find somebody's culture. You're going to use something from the real world in your work. You are better off knowing what it is, acknowledging what it is, being respectful of it, than trying to say, oh no, I have created a completely unique culture that draws nothing from the cultures of the real world, because that's bullshit.
Yeah.
It doesn't happen. That's not how brains work. You may have created a mishmash of 5 different cultures and it looks different on the surface, but you're better off knowing your sources and acknowledging them, which is why I very specifically, when I look at a world, I look at a specific region, I go, okay, what real world culture existed in a similar region and why? And then I modify it to suit whatever's different about the region. In the successor states of Rhaegar, it's very simple and fairly direct one-to-one European, right? Except not exactly. I'll get to that in a second. Far west, we have Hesperia, which is fundamentally Spain, except during the Arabic ascension there. So that super highlight of art and science during that time, right? Right next to them, they have Chaltia, which in this world, basically the Roman Empire equivalent, which is Rhaegar, the successor states of Rhaegar. Since they had the same gods and the gods were real, they peacefully absorbed Chaltia rather than going in and killing all their priests. So Chaltia retained most of its culture. So it's a Celtic Gaul equivalent, but post-Roman.
Yeah, I was just going to say that's post-Roman.
Right. Take to the right, we have Theodonia, which is like the Holy Roman Empire. It's a, confederation of small states, small Germanic states that came out of the fall of the Empire of Rhaegar. And then to the right of that, we have Scaria, which is Hungary and Romania kind of haphazardly mixed together with large remaining elements of ancient pre-Roman Dacia. And then as you go just further east, that's where we have the Empire of Byzantos. Remember what I said about Byzantine rules?
Mm-hmm.
Imagine an empire that basically takes all the worst parts of the Persian Empire and the Byzantine Empire and throws out all the good stuff. Yeah. That's Byzantos. Because at the fall of the Western Empire, he intentionally changed his allegiance to the dark gods because he felt like the bright gods had abandoned them, when in fact it was kind of the other way around. The people of Rega had abandoned the gods. So the gods couldn't really, they're like, we can't help you. You stop doing all the stuff you're supposed to do. And that's when the empire fell. But he blamed the bright gods, and basically that's where the literally straight up evil empire of my world of that world. I don't like to say my world, I have too many of them, but the one I'm working the most on at the moment came from there. And as you can see, each of those has their own cultural angle, right? And they each come from a real world European post-Roman state. Here's the twist. The Reagan Empire had 3,000 years as a kingdom. No, it had 1,000 years as a kingdom, 1,000 years as a republic, and 1,000 years as an empire. So it lasted far longer than the actual Roman Empire. And all of the states involved, because they all were worshiping the same gods, and the gods said, "Thou shalt not treat any people as less than people," they all interbred completely freely. So by this point, the Reagan ethnicity is a complete mixture of North African, Sub-Saharan African, Mediterranean, Northern, and Southwest Asian or Middle Eastern. Meaning that the average Reagan is a brown-skinned person with curly to kinky hair of any color, because they also bred with gods and angels and stuff. So anime hair and eyes, but dark brown skin, So it's like the Roman Empire, but entirely POC.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Some of that art is popping up on Twitter and other places right now, because Shady Sale on Twitter is doing some of my art for me. She did the art for the Archmage of the successor states, she looks like about a 60 or 70-year-old black woman with long silver curly hair.
That's cool.
Yeah. Caecilia Stormborn. She is descended, like many of them are, she is descended distantly from the high god. They had a lot of demigods, so but yeah, so you can do that. I guess my point kind of got off the tangent again, but my point is you can take from so many cultures and use this culture as an inspiration. But then once you've thrown in the influence of those gods we were talking about at the beginning, see how that changes it. Because if you have a group of gods that are good, do talk to you, are real, and really care, you get a different setup from their worshipers.
Mm-hmm.
You get people who are legitimately following the rules, not because they're scared or whatever, but because they know the gods told them this, and it's really the truth. There's no doubt.
Yeah.
And they are a little bit scared because the gods absolutely will bust their ass. So that gives you a very different perspective on how things change, on the changes in those individual cultures, than if they were just the gods of that country and developed from the culture rather than the other way around.
So we're gonna jump back now. We got a lot of good stuff here. So I kind of agree with Jack, but I'm gonna jump back and touch on what Brian and Don said when I went to that big 3 comment. So one thing I'm sure a lot of people, especially new ones, I think of, it's like, well, how can I have a world without the geography of the world? So geography is an important part, but these big 3 that we've talked about so far are more important to have at least some ideas thought of and processed and figured out, because geography is something you can see, but what makes the world feel real and makes people connect with it are going to be things that we talked about. A religion, a pantheon there, government that people can resort to, a culture that people can recognize and agree with or disagree with even. So, Brian, since you kind of brought up geography, what is geography for you on this?
For me, at the highest level, I'm going to say it's geography is kind of, what is the climate of an area? What are the seasons look like? I mean, you can have large features, which will definitely play a role. But I again, and I get joked about a lot that I think a lot of world building with my stomach is I like to look at how something's built in terms of what can be grown there. So if it is a very fertile area with a very long growing season, what kind of crops are we going to see there? What is naturally there? What are they bringing in to grow there? What do they have there that is considered exotic elsewhere in the world? Kind of piggybacking off that in terms of geography is going to be kind of transportation and because of transportation trade. So, how easy is it to take something from spot A and take it to spot B? Are
Yeah.
there going to be certain hubs in the world that get a lot of stuff? And that's definitely going to influence the culture if certain places are going to be very easily receiving lots of different people from lots of different locations. And that's um again with my stomach something that you will first and foremost see with food and drink in the area, where you will see a lot of mixing, you'll see a lot of representation, and you'll see a lot of fusion, which creates dishes that no one place would have made on its own.
Yeah. Totally.
Absolutely.
So,
I wanted to actually address the geography thing.
Yeah.
Because you're not at all wrong. It's very critical, and it's one of the key factors in what makes a culture exist the way it does. It's why each of the cultures I mentioned in Rega is geographically situated. For instance, the effect of having mountains close to you on the east, cannot be overstated.
Yeah.
That means that when the sun comes up, you don't get direct sun for several more hours after dawn. That has a huge effect. Having those mountains there also means that even though you may be relatively southern latitude, it gets cold, et cetera, et cetera. So each of those factors, each of those geographical factors determines, like Brian says, what can be grown there, what is grown there, what comes out of the ground naturally, and what you use. But then to figure out what you actually eat and drink, you've got to combine the geography with the religion and the culture.
Yes. Totally.
Because maybe you've been forbidden to eat pork for very good reasons, considering pork killed you a lot before proper cleanliness. I am personally non-religious, but all of the rules of Leviticus actually made perfect sense when they were
the
written
time
to keep you alive.
Totally. And I think a lot of people do forget that. I was a butcher for 10 years. So I dealt with kosher food and food that was considered halal. And that's something that I found that a lot of people don't realize, is that a lot of that originated from, like you said, cleanliness, like especially with something like pork.
Let me point out, there's a story I like to tell. So you're gonna have to bear with me here to get to the end of it. When I was in Bosnia, there was a minefield that the kids would play in all the time, and they were told not to play there. They kept going, right? One day, somebody got the bright idea of putting up a sign that said, with a picture of Superman, that said, "Superman says don't play here." The kids immediately stopped. What this has to do with, let's go back to Leviticus. Smart guy figures out that every time they eat oysters, somebody dies. Every time they eat a pig, somebody dies. Goes, "Hey guys, stop doing that. We're dying. Hey guys, stop doing that. We're dying." All right, fine. God says stop doing that.
Yep.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Now you flip that around, of course, when you're dealing with a setting where you know the gods are real. The gods are going to tell you things like that, but they're probably going to explain why.
Hopefully.
At least some, at least to the higher ups.
Maybe.
Maybe. If you've got the good ones. Remember, I'm talking about good gods that actually care.
Well, trickster god might just be like running around.
Oh, no, yeah, there's some of that. But like, because of some of the interactions with the gods in Rega, they don't drink wine very much. They drink mead. Mead is their absolute favorite thing because they have a demigod of bees and honey and mead from early in the empire, and it just became more popular and spread across their entire area. That's where culture overrides locality.
Yeah. And it has a long-lasting effect on, like you said, instead of having a demigod of grapes, you have a demigod that is with the bees, and it just becomes part of their worship. And I can almost imagine with you talking about this, that you could probably see that kind of get into their religion too, where, relating it to religions that we're familiar with, maybe they're doing something akin to a communion, but with instead of wine, you have some sort of mead being used.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially, obviously, the relations for that god would obviously involve mead. Maybe mead is involved with most of the gods. Now, the moon god, one of the two moon gods, Vulpos, is known to have created beer before mead was created. So beer is also very popular. Because Inari and the Japanese myths also created beer. So beer and mead are popular everywhere. Wine is a sort of a weird thing that's mostly drunk over there in Vizantos. We don't know why. And partially because Vizantos drinks wine, it has become less popular in the successor states.
Yeah, everybody else is shying away from it.
Like, those guys are strange. And
the weird people are drinking the thing. We probably shouldn't drink the thing.
Right. Because even in a setting where, the gods are real and honest and everything, that doesn't mean the humans and the other mortals won't have some strange ideas about the world that they've come to on their own.
Yeah. Totally fair.
So one thing I'm going to make sure I point out here was it was hinted at and talked about a little bit in this geography conversation, but the main focus wasn't mountains, lakes, rivers, continents, islands, that sort of thing. Is that important? You need to have that? Yes. But that is not the sole purpose of geography.
Yeah. How far away stuff is, what grows there.
Yes.
Those kind of things.
How much trouble it is to get from point A to point B, like Brian said, is the really important part. How hard and how long.
Yep.
And again, that's a place where culture can really have a humongous effect. For instance, and again, I'll go back to the successor states of Rega because it's the one that's most freshly on my mind. They still have their roads. They still use the Regan roads and maintain them. So within the successor states, trade is easy. Outside it, it's hard. Because, we got a great road system here, but it doesn't go to, the equivalent of Scandinavia, and it certainly doesn't go across the water to the equivalent of Scotland.
Yeah.
Plus they're really strange up there, and they're all very pale-skinned and loud.
Yeah. The reason why I was talking about cataclysms is humankind has a tendency to define historical periods based on really bad things that have occurred. And so one thing that you can use for world building is, what was the most recent bad thing, and how are they recording their history from that point forward? Because oftentimes during those periods of time, history becomes the last thing that people are concerned with.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. It's kind of the disruption of information that can really lead to build out things. I know one of my favorite things to pop up in fiction, especially high fantasy fiction, is the idea that the civilization that you are living in is not the first civilization in a given setting. It is one of a couple before that. I know systems like Numenera bake that right in to the world building itself,
Fair.
and that is something that I have always enjoyed, because I really like the idea of, like, we've built off of, or maybe not built, maybe we have come to the smoldering ruins of the civilization before us, the advanced civilization. They had figured everything out, but something happened, and either we are just go ahead.
Sometimes it's both. Like,
Yeah.
you built off of some aspects because somebody remembered it, and you've
Mhm.
lost the other half. Well, we still have their medicine and roads, but we have no idea how they made that metal, and
Yeah.
we don't wear plate armor anymore because we can't do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Great place to look at is speaking of roads and traveling and everything, the Forgotten Realms, the Sword Coast is, it's very popular because, not because Wizards doesn't feel like fleshing out any rest of the world at all. Not that, they don't want to touch that, but it's great travel. They've got the trade road that goes from the very bottom, Baldur's Gate, and below that to the very top,
Yeah.
Icewind Dale and everything up there.
Mhm.
And you also have the oceans that can be traveled with cities like Waterdeep that have
And
magnificent
the
ports
actual
that are just
routes
chock full.
to places like the Dale Lands and other places further east
Yes.
are much harder to travel in the realms.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And that is the
I've
only
been a
reason
fan
why
of the
they have not
realms.
fleshed it out.
Yeah.
Only
I've
reason.
been a fan of the realms for a very long time, so I totally get it. The few modules I plan to make are going to be for the realms, but they're in the Dale Lands.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
I'm actually starting at 10th level
Mhm.
for modules in the Dale Lands, starting with a module about werewolves.
Very cool.
But it's going to be from 10th to 20th.
Like that.
Because everybody seems to be covering 1st to 10th, and they seem to think that in 5e, upper level play is bad. My experience is rather the opposite. Upper level play in 5e seems better balanced to me.
Yeah.
I think people
but anyway,
think it's
that-
bad
that's
because
really-
they just never hit it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, 95% of campaigns don't make it past level 10.
That's true, and it's unfortunate.
It is. It is
But,
very unfortunate.
The roads and the shipping and all of that, and the technology for shipping is all very critical. And if you had it better before and had contact with wide sections of the world, and now you're contracted down to these few you can reach, but you have some memory of those other places, that can be really evocative.
Yeah, it can really impact the culture.
Old stories say that far to the east is the land of Parfait, where they love to eat ice cream in stacks.
Yep. Yeah, and that's why I really like approaching, especially new games with new groups, as this post-apocalyptic, almost dark age.
It's one of the things from 4E that was a great idea that they didn't handle as well as they should have.
You're not wrong.
Points of light, just a little bit. Here we have this point of light from the fallen civilization and this point of light. If they'd actually done the Nintervale and the fallen kingdom of Nerath with some kind of detail, I think we would have had a better time.
Yeah.
Because again, it's explicit. And in my world building, and I encourage those out there watching to be explicit in your world building. You're going to have ancient dungeons. Have them be from something.
Yep.
Yes.
Exactly.
You're going to have ancient ruins. You're going to have ancient temples. Know where they came from. Know who had them.
Yep.
In the successor states of Rhaegar, the most obvious one, right, is Rhaegar. It's the most recent empire. It fell about 1,100 years ago. And it lasted for 3,000 years. But it's not the first one.
Nope.
They don't know a whole lot about the first one. There are vague stories that the first one, somewhere to the southeast, was destroyed by the great purple dragon Firencandium, the first chromatic ever created.
Yeah. Gotcha.
But they don't even know the name of the country. Because now it's just called the Land of Bones and Fire.
Fair.
Yeah. I love building out settings like that, and building those, because it's one of those things that you like. I feel like a lot of newer GMs, specifically going into the world building, they kind of see it as, well, why am I building this out if I'm not going to eventually monologue this to my players? How am I going to build this out when I'm not going to get a chance to sit my players down, pull up my PowerPoint, and go, when the world started?
Yeah, that's not the point.
Nope.
You can have all the material available for them to read if they want to.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I like doing
and
revelatory stuff.
You can go, hey, Billy, you're playing the bard. You have a high history score. If you want to read this, you can.
Yeah.
But anytime you want to give them world lore, give it to them organically in the game.
Yeah.
Let them come into the
Mosaics.
situation and go, hey, real quick, here's what you know about this.
Yeah.
And don't put that behind a roll unless you don't want to be sure that they know it.
Yeah.
If it's something they might not know and you like that, make them roll. Otherwise, never put world lore behind a roll.
Yeah.
Give it to the person who has the highest score in that area and move on.
Yeah. What I like to do, and sorry, go ahead. I didn't mean to cut in.
Secondarily, the point of world building is not lore dumping.
No.
Yes.
World building is for you. One, it's fun. Two, it's really fun if you do it right. On to the actual useful bits. The more you know about your world, the deeper it is, and even if they never see the moving parts or never see the man behind the curtain, especially if they don't, your players or your readers will feel it. They will know that it is deeper, because every additional detail, every piece you know about your world will inform your decision making in the moment. It will inform your improv. It will inform your design. And when it does, it will affect the game, even if that specific thing is never brought up in the game. Yep. And the more of it you have, the less individual session prep you have to do, because the world exists and it will react to what they do.
Yeah,
yes,
exactly.
Yes, that's nail on the head right there. Is you're building out the world. You're building out it less like I'm writing the script that the players are going to be actors and actresses that are going to move through, and you're going more so going, I understand this world. I have a better understanding of things. So when you push this button, I know what's going to happen, and I know that it is going to happen because of X, Y, and Z. And I think that can be one of the hardest things to kind of really internalize, is the going from that I need to write out a script to I just need to understand it, and like you said, know where you're going with it, understand the mechanics of it, even if your players aren't going to know it, and you're just going to talk about it on social media at some point at like 3 in the morning because you're really excited about it.
When it comes to world building in function, world building functionality, you've got to remember that what you are doing is you are building a world and presenting a situation. World building and GMing, to me, are the same. They are one thing. You can GM without building your own world. That does not mean you won't be doing world building.
You're not wrong.
Even if you're using the Forgotten Realms, you will be doing world building.
Yes.
Your choice of antagonists, your choice of plots, your choice of situations, all of that is world building.
Yep.
Right?
Absolutely.
Oh,
when
yes.
you do so with intentionality, all you'd have to do is build the world as wide and deep as you possibly can and keep doing it anytime you have inspiration. Let it hang together consistently. Recognize that you're stealing from the best. Look for the best to steal from. Don't be ashamed of stealing, because everybody does it. There is no new story. There is no new concept. File off the serial numbers, remix it, go.
Tropes are tropes for a reason.
Yep.
Mythology, for me, is foundational to that. It's foundational to the world building, both the mythology in the world and our mythology. It is the best. Mythology and folklore are the best possible sources for inspiration for building a world followed closely by the really good fiction by people who based it on mythology and folklore. Because the stories are old, they have depth, they're tested.
Mm-hmm.
Know they will work because they have worked for thousands of years.
Yep.
And then you can just throw a little twist on the end to make it your own, or throw this bit and that bit in the blender to make it your own. But don't think you're going to come up with something new. We have 200,000 years of humans being like us, basically like us. And all we have to show for it recently is weird tech most of us don't understand. But it hasn't affected our mindset as much as it could have because we don't know how it works. It might as well be magic for the majority of us.
That's fair.
And even then, one person may know a section of it really deeply, but they don't know the next bit over. There's too much. You can't. But the thing is, like I said, know what you're doing and set a situation forward. You are not writing a story. You're creating a story. You're creating a world. But the story actually comes from what the players do with the situation you hand them.
Mm-hmm.
If you write the end of your campaign before you start, you're doing it wrong. If you have an idea that you'd like to see this really cool scene at the end of your campaign and it might end up that way, but you don't care much, cool.
Yeah.
Have ideas for where it may go, but understand the minute you unleash your players on it, it is their world.
Yep.
Yeah.
You have created
totally.
the world. It is your world, but they are the heroes. They are the characters, not your NPCs, not your story, not your plot. The story is about them. I've been running tabletops for 40 years. I ran LARPs for 20 of that as well. And I have always been, this is the order of importance. Character, story, then rules.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And when I say character, I'm not talking about mine. I'm talking about PCs every time. The story of that PC is more important than anything else I have going.
Mm-hmm.
Because that character story, that player's story is what we're trying to do. We're trying to give them the chance to make that story.
Yep.
And the story they come in with is very important. Now, don't get me wrong. When they make that story, if they have a backstory, they need to have the good grace to learn enough about the world they're going to be playing in from you to make a backstory that fits.
Yeah.
I do not feel that we are always required to let them play whatever they want.
Mm-hmm.
Now that
It's a conversation. It's a back and
yeah, that exactly. That being said, it's a conversation because
absolutely,
as a GM, something that can help you with your world building is your players' backstories.
Yep.
You can absolutely do it that way too, and I have in the past. I have gone make some characters and then built a world around the characters they made.
I will point out that Jeff's favorite character is one I made him make with constraints.
Those absolutely, that's a big thing. Decide which things not to allow, and you have decided some very important things about the nature of your world.
Exactly.
And it is okay to not allow things based on your concept of the world.
Yep.
For instance, when my players came to me, or when I went to my players, we were about to start the Successor States of Rega actual play. One of my players wanted to play a half-orc. I had to tell him no, because there are literally no orcs in Rega. There are hobgoblins and goblins, but there are no orcs. Their position has been their position in the scheme of things has been taken by some other creatures. So he made a different character. He made one that fit in with what we had in mind, and everything has gone swimmingly. I have I don't have anybody playing a tiefling, but I have somebody playing an Aasimar. I have somebody playing one of my Spar toy, which is a brand new race I created, because Dragonborn in the setting are just spawn of chromatic dragons.
Mm-hmm.
So the equivalent to them on the metallic dragon side is the Spartoi. I don't know if you're familiar with the Greek myth of the dragon's teeth, where Jason and I think Cadmus before him had the dragon's teeth, and they threw them out there and sewed them in the ground, and they sprung up warriors.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember
Those
that
are
now.
called Spartoi.
Gotcha.
So in my setting, the Spartoi, in this setting, the Spartoi were made from the teeth of the metallic dragons by the good gods as a counter to the dragonborn and kobolds who were spawn of the chromatic dragons.
Gotcha. That makes sense.
And if you want further information on how all that works, I have my alternate ecology of dragons over on my website. And my, or if you want to pay me, I've got my, the alternate ecology of dragons is also in my Dragon Queen Blues on DM's Guild. But the point is that I slotted in a different race, and the Spartoi basically take up the slot of both the Goliaths and the Dragonborn. They're the big, strong guys with a non-humanoid perspective.
Gotcha.
There aren't any Goliaths in the successor states, although they may live in the world. It's just they're much more likely to be somewhere up north where giants are more common.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Because successor states of Rega is focusing primarily on Greco-Roman mythoi for its monsters. And in Greco-Roman myth, giants, other than Cyclopes, are individuals.
Yep.
There's one giant of this kind. There is this giant of that kind. The only group of giants there are is, as I said, the Cyclopes. Which I do have, when I come out with my Lucis Naturae, I have the greater Cyclopes and some other things in that. I'm coming out with a monster book early next year.
Cool.
But the point I was trying to get at is the same thing that you said. His favorite character was one you made him make with constraints.
Oh, yeah.
Limitations breed creativity.
Absolutely.
Unlimited options breed decision paralysis.
Exactly.
It is far better to give people limitations and have them build than say, hey, you just make whatever you want. If, on the other hand, they come to you before you've even started a game or whatever and go, man, I really want to play a blah, then you go, okay, all right. Hey, guys, what else? What do you want to kind of play? And then you figure out how to meld that together. Both approaches are cool. Both approaches are great. I have done both approaches. But if I have already built a world and you want to play in that world, there are constraints.
Yep, exactly.
If I'm going to build a world to suit you, all right, bring me your character concepts and let's see how it meshes.
Yep.
Because I love building worlds anyway, so I don't care.
Yep, I can throw together stuff in about 30 minutes with a piece of paper. That's my GM style. Ask Jeff.
Yeah,
I do it all the time.
In an hour, I can have, because of, I've been doing this for 40 years and I read a lot. Let me point this out. This is very critical for all world builders out there.
Read
everything. Watch everything. Watch the world around you. Everything is inspiration. Take it all in, file it away. The more you know, the more you can do.
Yep. Everything is content, my dudes.
Everything is content. We don't mean that everything we're saying is content.
Nope.
We mean that everything you experience is fuel for the content you're going to produce as a storyteller of any kind. From writer to physical teller of stories to game master to whatever. It is all grist for the mill.
Having restrictions in your world too, things that don't exist or aren't allowed, also gives you story and plot points.
Absolutely.
Like my game that's currently running, that's been running for over 4 years now, they are approaching the end, but the first thing I told them out the gate was if you want to play a druid, we're going to have a conversation, because the folklore in this world was that druids don't exist. They are myths. They are legends. They are not real. And so that none of them chose to play a druid, which was fine, but that allowed me to use that as a story point when they discovered an ancient druidic civilization at one point and realized, oh, druids do exist. And oh, one of the leaders of our guild that we're a member of is actually a druid. What?
Well, yeah, It's great when the secret society of whatever managed to convince everybody they don't exist anymore.
Exactly. So like
Exactly.
I didn't completely outlaw it, but we were gonna have to have a really good story, and that's what I told them. We'd have to work together, have a really good story, but this is what the world says about it, and they all took a different route, so it worked out. But
Yeah.
that's what this world building like one of the things it boils down to in the end is all these decisions you make. You might have players that really want to know. They want to know the lore. They want to hear it. They're going to show you that by how they play. The character is going to be looking for information. They're going to ask about libraries or sources of knowledge that they can investigate. And you know, if you've got those and they want it, you can give those pieces to them. Makes them happy, makes you happy because hey, this thing I created, they're excited about it. You give them information. But even if that doesn't happen, as we've said, and I'm just going to kind of reiterate here, having all that information to you influences decisions you as a GM are going to make. You know, how you're going to respond to different things your players do. It's going to be, you're going to respond quicker. You're going to have a reasoning behind that response. And as, you know, Jack specifically said earlier, it's going to come across to the players. They're not going to be like, oh, he put a lot of work, the GM put a lot of work into this and they know their stuff because you made a decision, but they're going to get a feel and they're going to get more immersed into this world and into this story that you're creating together because they can feel how much you know about it, how much you put into it.
Yeah.
And jumping back to another point too, you've created this wonderful thing. Like we talked about, you don't have a script. I don't care how much planning or anything you've done as a GM. Once you unleash your players somewhere, they are going to do something you didn't plan for.
Welcome to the sandbox.
Correct.
They're going to do something you didn't plan for. And so if you have all this other creation you've done, you are ready to go and jump on whatever crazy train or bandwagon the players are
When they
deciding
decide
to go with.
when they decide to go east when you thought they were going to go west, it's okay. You already know what's to the east, at least generally speaking. The rules can be filled in whenever you feel like it.
Yep.
You know what the answer is.
Yeah. One thing that I like to do, especially when it comes to world lore, that I can project and see how well players are going to take on anything that we've created is have pictography or murals or mosaics and explain what's on them, but don't give detail. Like, hey, you see this mosaic here, and see whether they dig in or not. And if they roll good, you can share some info. If not, just move on. But it's a good way to have those stories or mythologies just kind of sprinkled throughout your dungeons and such, especially when it comes to things that may not even be game relevant, but something that just flavors the world.
And sometimes it's fun to see what your party says when you describe this mural. Maybe they kind of catch on to what you're implying. Sometimes they go the complete opposite way, and you know what?
That's okay.
That's fantastic. That is what most of the population thinks happened.
Right, because if they can misinterpret it, and all of them seem to misinterpret it a specific way, and you don't have the gods there specifically going, hey man, that's not what I said, then you're going to get a wide variety of stories. Or if they all come to the same conclusion, you're right. That's most likely the story most people believe.
Yep. It's
even
still a brontosaurus.
Like the murals and the statues and the little notes here and there are so critical because they're ways to show bits of the world background. And if they want to know more, they will ask you questions about it after you've said, well, it looks like this thing. And then they start asking you questions, and then you're like, yeah, now I can lord up because they've actually asked me.
Exactly. That's how you send out those feelers to see whether or not they're interested.
That's how you know what they're interested in. You put it in front of them vaguely, and once they start digging, then you're like, aha, that's the stuff they want to know about. Let's go there.
Yep.
And then that's the other thing, is that's how you can know which parts of your world they most want to engage with.
Exactly.
And another part about the interaction between world building and the game, this goes both ways, and it's a GM tip as well, I think, that's really critical. Whatever your characters make, whatever your players make as a character, every single thing on their character sheet is a vote for that content in the game.
Yep.
People
especially
did not
background.
put persuasion on their character sheet at a high level in order to never be able to talk. People did not get a high score in survival in order to hand wave every hunting expedition.
Yep.
People did not build the most badass can opener they possibly could in order to not get to open cans with it. Whatever character they build, whatever, if they're a power gamer, if they're a min-maxer, those aren't necessarily bad things, and they are not incompatible with role-playing in any way.
Nope.
Just throwing that out. If this person has built a chipper shredder with 2 swords, well, by golly, you better give them some situations where they can chipper shred their way through the whole thing.
Oh, yeah. And put a spotlight on that.
Absolutely. Otherwise, you are actively betraying effort they've put into your game.
Yep.
Yeah,
and when you're
I
building
agree.
worlds, like we were talking about, when you're building a world based on the characters they've handed you, which we talked about being basically the 2 fundamental approaches. The third one is everybody builds the world together, but that's far more common in games like Fate and stuff like that than in D&D.
Yep.
But when you are building based on the characters they've handed you, take that into consideration. If you've got a player character who's a 2-sword wielding guy with this particular set of abilities, think to yourself and go, all right, is that guy unique? Or is there a whole group of swordsmen who've trained that way?
Yep.
The second one's more likely.
Yeah. And the players are literally telling you the story they want to experience through their characters.
They absolutely are. They absolutely are. And they're doing it again, whether they start with the characters first or you start with the world first.
Yep.
You give them your world and they build this set of characters, they're telling you which parts of it they want to interact with.
Yep.
Listen. Pay attention to what your players are saying, because they can tell you so much without ever opening their mouths. They hand you the character sheet, you go, oh, you've got a very high will save. You want to live out the fantasy of being able to shrug off those mental attacks and ignore that person trying to control your brain. Cool. I will make sure that happens.
Yep.
From time to time, you've got to target their weaknesses as well, because if they've specifically built a weak point, that's also
part of the
a
story.
request for that kind of content.
That's what I was about to add, because I have a couple players that will build their characters with specific weaknesses or flaws in mind and will go, I want this to come up in the game. I want this to be something that is going to paint their story, because over the course of this story we're telling together, I want my character to accept the flaw, understand the flaw, and just get better or overcome the flaw.
Yeah. Almost internalize and process that weakness.
Yeah, and at that point they get a different one, but
right. When the only time that I worry about that being a problem is if you get that occasional, far more rare, pure min-maxer who's taking a dump in some area because they just want to be good at this other thing, but they really want you to ignore that weakness. But to me, that's
true.
also a really important reason not to.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you got to balance in all things.
I also come from the perspective that while I started with Moldvay Basic in 82, that Irolotus cover, as I was talking before, I've done every edition of D&D. I've played GURPS. GURPS is actually my favorite system. I play GURPS. I play Genesis. I play...
I love Genesis.
I played Cyberpunk. I've played Shadowrun. I've played... The whole front page of my website has a list I cannot go on. It's too long. The point is that games like GURPS, and to a lesser extent Cyberpunk, have these weaknesses built in as part of the character, as part of the concept. And now the backgrounds in D&D 5 is one of my favorite parts of D&D 5 because they do too.
Yep.
There are flaws built into your character. There are backgrounds built into your character, and they have mechanical effects.
Yeah.
When you only get extra power by taking flaws, i.e. GURPS,
Mhm.
the flaws become as important as the advantages, and you choose them very carefully because you want to deal with the fact that, no, I literally cannot tell a lie, or I always follow the law. And that's actually a more specific way of looking at it than I'm lawful good.
Yep.
Lawful good means a bunch of different things to a bunch of different people.
Yep.
The honesty disadvantage, on the other hand, you literally always follow the law of the place you're in if you know it,
Mm-hmm.
is specific.
Yes. Where lawful good is descriptive, not prescriptive.
I'm chaotic evil could mean a number of things.
Yep, exactly.
I'm a berserker who's a sadist and has bloodlust means
That's
some
specific.
very specific things.
Yeah.
And you might not even be a bad person.
Nope.
All right, I'm gonna take us a little different direction now because I'm sure we could talk about a lot of this stuff for a long time. But we talked about some broad, big things for world building that you need to make a world kind of be immersive and stuff you can get from that. Once you have that, the way you really get to the point of knowing this world is little things. So I'm just going to kind of go kind of around the screen here, and we're just gonna each of us we'll do like 2 or 3 each, but just to kind of give people stuff to think about. So one of the things that I like to think about when creating a world too are holidays. Are there holidays? Are there festivals? What are involved in those? Is it a solstice? Is it a specific event in history? Is it something that a lot of people celebrate? Is it something specific to, a clan of druids or something like that? These are things that make it more immersive. Don?
Me?
Yeah.
One of the things that I try to do is I try to look at things from a commoner's perspective, and especially in the starting town. So if a commoner is getting attacked by bandits, goblins, or whatever, they might just call them all orcs because they don't know the difference. So they will tell you misinformation because of their limited information about the world. And so I try to sew in skewed perspectives from the NPCs while the players are talking to them to make the characters feel more real and less like, oh, it's coming from the DM, so it must be absolute. Because that is a bad trap to fall into, especially for new DMs and GMs.
Every narrator should be unreliable to some extent.
Exactly. And one of the things I try to talk about when I run multiple groups through different stories in my home world, and they're like, but this other party did this. I'm like, everything that your characters do when their game ends becomes stories that are told around campfires. There's going to be inconsistencies between fact and reality. And so that's how I get away with running multiple stories and sessions in the same world.
Love it.
All right, so Jack, this is something you do on the regular anyway. So what's one little thing that helps you create a deeper
little
world?
bit. There are so many little details, but one of the ones I like to focus on, especially in that starting town, because again, that's what you're going to do for your first session. If you're just now world building, or even if you've been world building forever, you're going to start almost certainly in a small town. If you're not, then you're going to start in one neighborhood of a big city, which is effectively a small town.
Same thing.
And what you do at that point is the tidbits that make it real there are, what are the streets like and why? Are there lights? What kind? Are they magic lights? If they're magic lights, is it because they have a local magic user who can do it? Or because they have a lot of money, they're particularly affluent? Is it, what are the houses made of? Why did they choose that? Did they only have those things to do, or is that the only technology they know of? Are their houses swaddle and daub even though they have a full forest next door because the king has forbidden you to go in there and cut his trees? Those are all real things.
Yep, they are real things.
Do you live right next to a forest full of plentiful food, but you're starving because if you kill a deer, you're going to get hung?
All right, Brian,
those again, like he pointed out, like that's all Don pointed out. That's all from those local people's perspective. Their world is made up of those rules.
Exactly.
All right, to you, Brian. What's one of your small things?
My small things, I'll summarize it as I like to know the stories that are being told. I like to know, what stories are being told around the campfire, but my total favorite is what scary stories are being told. What stories are being told to children? What stories are being told
Cautionary
around the
tales.
fire to scare friends? Yes. And why are they being told?
I actually did that one as a world building prompt a couple of weeks ago.
That's a good one. It's a good one because you just sit there and you look, and I've actually started off sessions in some of my games with a scary story being told around the fire, and then no explanation, just jump right back into the session.
Heck yeah.
And it
The really
makes you
fun
think.
question, and you don't necessarily have to answer it at the very beginning when you're first telling the scary story, is it true? Because of course you're dealing with fantasy worlds, science fiction worlds, or whatever. That doesn't mean that the scary story is necessarily based in their reality.
Yeah, or even accurate.
Right. And if it is based in their reality, it could be based on something entirely different from what they think it is. If all you saw was a shadowy figure and suddenly the man fell over dead for no reason, you might think, oh, he was maybe killed by an undead shadow. What really happened was this group of assassins from the kingdom over sent in one of their best who was wearing a shadow cloak and touched the guy with his poison ring. But the story that comes out of it is the Shadow Man.
Yeah, I like to do that sort of thing with religions too, where it's totally a game of telephone.
Mm-hmm. I have done that in several settings. Again, Rega's not one of them, but Rega's oddly simplistic, and it has a hearty feel to it. Not hearty. I don't know, wholesome feel to it because of it. It's weird.
All right, so we'll do one more each for this because I like where we've gotten kind of going with discussion. And so another thing that can, Brian actually touched on this a little bit vaguely when we talked about geography, but delicacies or exotic foods. And if you're taking your starting town, does the starting town have something that you can only get in this place? And
Right.
kind of be able to describe that, why it's rare, why it's exotic. Give
like the sky fruit.
Like the sky, Don could like the sky fruit. What makes it different, and give see if you can describe it in a way that your players can envision this, or even maybe kind of taste it a little bit just from a description, and that gives just like something for them to kind of hang on to and remember. And maybe this is something that throughout the campaign they come back to get, or maybe it's a plot point because somebody wants this delivered somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
Options abound.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh yeah.
So Don?
Well, I like where you're going with it. One of the things that I try to do in the very beginning of any scene, and it's just something that gets me into the scene when I'm describing it, especially early on, is explaining what the place smells like, because it triggers memories. And when you do that,
most strongly tied to memory, yeah.
Yeah, and so if you start explaining how something smells briny like the ocean, most people who've been near the coast immediately can associate that smell, and all of a sudden the verisimilitude is on, and they're in that scene. And then you can start laying the bricks down of, if it's a tavern area, dockside, what have you, you've already started establishing a tone to that scene by just the smells. And that for me is really powerful as far as world building and storytelling, at least from the little bit side of things. That's what I got.
On the scent thing, especially again for people who have smelled it, but even for those who haven't, simply because the phraseology has become relatively common, that sickly, almost sweet coppery smell.
Mm-hmm.
It is so evocative for those who have been in the presence of a great deal of spilled fresh blood.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then you don't ever have to mention seeing the blood or the gore to get the feeling going.
Yeah.
All right, we're on to you, Jack. What's another one of your favorite small things?
I'm going to go to what you were saying about delicacies. I do agree that delicacies are very important. One of the examples is, you might be from one of those coastal towns where they harvest gooseneck barnacles, which are super expensive and super hard to
yeah.
Maybe you're one of the few places in, like, from Alaska or from the coast of Britain for various kinds of salmon. And there are delicacies and things like that in almost every place on the planet because of how the ecologies work. You'll find something relatively local that they can only get there.
Yeah.
The question is whether it will become popular enough to make that a commodity.
Yeah, that's true.
Some things don't work out so well.
Yeah, like the good old Colorado Rocky Mountain oyster. It's a pretty local delicacy. Yeah, most people just can't get past the origin.
Well, what's funny about that, of course, is a lot of people don't realize that a similar delicacy is sold in Spain.
Mm-hmm. It is.
Yeah, specifically near and at bullfighting arenas.
Mm-hmm. Do they still have what is the virility rumor tied to that? I forget.
They do. The rumor is tied to it, I believe, but it's been debunked about 1 million times.
Oh yeah. But that's like the old saying, the old mythology behind it.
Yeah, tiger balls is the one in most of Asia.
Yeah,
for the
that's
same
fair.
thing.
Yeah,
and there's a certain amount of there's a tiny amount of scientific credibility in it because, of course, both of them do contain large amounts of testosterone.
Yeah, I mean, they're hormone based. I mean, they're hormone producing organs.
Did you know that most energy drinks have taurine in them? You know what taurine is?
Yes.
It's bull testosterone.
Yep. It's exactly what taurine is.
Women's birth control is made often with something called Premarin.
Yeah, pregnant mare's urine.
Pregnant mare urine, because horses' hormones are almost identical to ours.
Yeah.
To the point where when a horse smells a woman, they sometimes respond to them as if they were mares.
Yep. Unfortunately.
So the treats and the delicacies, there can be stories, rumors, different things behind them. Are they true? Are they not?
Oh, absolutely. On that, a concept to throw in there is, in your world, if dragons and stuff exist, do people eat them? Or have they decided that eating anything that can talk is a bad idea?
Yeah. What's the definition of cannibalism?
What's the definition of people?
I like that.
Yeah. That's one of those things that I really, really think about in my worlds, believe it or not, because it matters.
Yeah. Absolutely does. Absolutely does. I have one world that is in fact made up all of anthropomorphic animals, and they define cannibalism as literally eating anything that talks.
Yeah, eating anything that's sentient enough to communicate.
Right. And as far as they know, in that world, it's only mammals and the occasional bird who are sapient.
Gotcha.
All right.
But they may be wrong.
What's your final small thing for right now, Brian?
My final small thing. I mean, I really like the delicacy. Going back to that, I think that's really good. I will say another small thing is, what does dawn and what does dusk mean to a group of people? What is the implications of the lights going out? Does it mean that Does it mean that you need to flock into town? Do you need to get behind walls? What is that implication and why?
Is it like in the real world, darkness hides danger, thus we all fear it? Or like in different parts of the real world, is darkness the only time when it's comfortable to be outside because the sun will kill you, and thus we all love it?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that is why desert people have beneficent moon gods and angry sun gods, and northern island people have beneficent sun gods and crazy moon gods and are scared of the night.
Yep.
Mhm.
Or like Don said, does your sun set in the east instead of the west because somebody said something wrong one time, and it just decided it became canon in that world because someone said east instead of west one time?
That is very significant. I know it looks like on the surface that would have very significant differences, but the thing is, it doesn't. All you're doing is flipping it. At that point, there will be some differences because all of the associations are made with the East would then be made with the West, and vice versa. West would be the area of beginnings, of creation, of mourning, of youth, of life.
Yeah.
And East would be the land of age and of death and of darkness, etc.
Yeah. Like another thing that deals with dusk and dawn is in my world, the moon is always full. The monthly transitions are elemental colors. And
neat.
So each of the 8 months, the moon starts with this different color in the center, and halfway through it transitions to full. But it's always technically full.
Right, because you can always see it. It's always getting enough light.
Yeah.
But whatever causes it in that setting, because it doesn't have to be following our... one of the things that a lot of modern world builders don't really grok, they don't really internalize is you don't have to follow our rules.
Exactly. And so
your world does not have to be a sphere that is orbiting a sun in a etc. etc. I have worlds that are spheres orbiting suns and people know it. Okay. Perfectly fine. Both in fantasy and in science fiction. I have some worlds that are arguably completely flat worlds that they're still hammering the edges out of chaos. And when you're in chaos, nothing there is solid or real until somebody not from chaos sees it.
Yeah, and then it becomes static.
As long as they can maintain it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and that's how you grow the world, as it were.
Yeah,
that actually started from an early interpretation of the very old module People on the Borderlands. Which I get to run as an not as an actual play, as a private game, as a reward for a charity drive we did.
Nice.
But I'm running the 5e version of Keep on the Borderlands, and while I'm not dealing with that part, I am dealing with that part in my Pathfinder version of it, which is set in a very complicated world I'm not going to get into.
All right. I'm going to kind of wrap us up here. We're getting about the 2-hour mark, which is longer than these usually go. But there was just a lot of good stuff going on here, and I didn't want to cut it off too soon. So we're gonna go. Yeah, I mean, we're gonna go around the horn again. Well, actually, we're gonna do it a little bit differently. Yeah, a little bit differently this time. But just parting remarks about world building, and then we're gonna start with you, Don.
Well, my first suggestion is don't panic. Steal what you know and relabel a lot of it. Save yourself a lot of headaches, because most of the world building is probably, what's that old adage? There's no such thing as new ideas. Just use other people's ideas like a palette and kind of paint your own paint. Your painting of what you see or what you want in the world. But yeah, don't panic. I think that's probably my number one thing. Don't panic and take it small first.
Take it small and work out bigger as you go. All right, Jack, parting quick world building advice.
I totally agree with Don. Don't panic. It's not as scary as you think it is. It's
Nah.
all been done. Number one, you should be playing with your friends.
Yep, exactly.
And they should be wanting you to have fun and vice versa. Don't panic. You're all there to have fun. Just be chill and it'll be easier on everybody if you can manage it. If you can't, it's fine. Stage fright is also real. But
The hardest part is starting.
So do it.
Yep.
Here's the other thing. Don is also right. There's nothing new. Everything is grist for the mill. Everything you hear, everything you see, everything you experience. Steal the best parts you like, but do so intentionally. Know that you're doing it so that you can be respectful to the sources you've stolen from.
Exactly.
All right, Brian.
Everything that's been said so far is fantastic. It's spot on. I'd say when you're starting out, start small. Don't be afraid to, for the sake of world building, just take something that is already existing, a pre-existing world, a pre-existing setting, and mold it
100%.
to your own. Like Jack said, that is still world building. You are still doing world building.
Absolutely.
And I guess the final thing I would say is your players aren't mind readers. You might think they catch on a lot more than they do. There's a lot that you will think will be blatantly obvious because you have stared at it for hours and you've thought about it and it's just lived rent-free in your brain. They will be not aware of. And that's fine.
If you want them to know something, you really want them to know something, tell them at least 3 times.
And slap it in their face 3 times at least. Like, I'm not talking like itty bitty details, like right main stage, big spotlight 3 times.
Correct. Hinting, you may get lucky and they'll chase it down. You might. If you need them to know it, put it center stage 3 times.
And don't put
only
it
once. They
a
may think
skill check.
it's not important and ignore it.
Don't put it behind a skill check if you want them where they need to know it. Because when you
Put
put up the chance,
nothing critical behind a skill check.
Yeah, don't make it mechanically impossible to learn. That's a mistake.
All right. I guess
Just
my
find the
little piece
person with
of
the highest skill and give them the info.
Yep.
My little piece of advice kind of ties in with the don't panic, but just don't be afraid to make mistakes either. Like
you're
everybody's
going
everybody's going to make mistakes, and it's okay to admit that you've made a mistake. As a GM, you're not going to be this. No player should be looking at you as someone that knows everything and is never going to make a mistake.
All pork chops were perfect.
Putting that kind of pressure on yourself is just going to make it more stressful and not as fun for you.
Some of the best stuff I've ever made happened by mistake.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
Happened by accident.
Yes.
I meant to say this thing. I said this thing, realized the thing I said was actually better. And then it was canon.
Yeah, you just roll with it. You're like, that's how it is now.
Oh, 100%. If all pork chops were perfect, there wouldn't be hot dogs.
Correct. That's a very good way of putting it and very critical. Have fun with it as part on top of all of the rest of this. Not just don't panic, not just
it's all play.
But yeah, it's all play. Now don't get me wrong, playing is important. I actually have a whole article on why tabletop role playing is more important than people think it is, called The Third Space on my website. But one of the reasons it is important is because it's fun.
Yep.
We're here to have fun just as much as the players. Have fun with it. We are players. We just have a slightly different role than the other players. You are not there to cater to them. You are there to make the game as fun for all of you together as possible.
Yep.
I've seen a lot of stuff in the last couple of years that says you're a bad DM if you don't let your players do whatever they want.
Yeah.
That is false. You're a bad DM if you don't try to have everyone have as much fun as possible.
Yep.
These are not the same thing.
Nope.
And a lot of what we've talked about might seem to focus, like we didn't necessarily say it directly, but the interpretation could see a focus on D&D or medieval fantasy, things like that. But all of this advice works for any setting. It works for a technologically advanced setting.
Look at
something in space.
Yeah, look at any sci-fi setting, and they are going to have a Mediterranean city analog. They will, where there's a massive central hub that's full of trade and people of every kind. That is like a staple of every sci-fi civilization.
The palace, in Star Wars, you're talking about the palace on Naboo. You're also talking about the market at Tatooine. The palace on Naboo is Italy. It literally is, by the way. Yeah. Also, Tatooine is basically when you get to Mos Eisley and Mos Espa, Tatooine is functionally Tangiers or Casablanca, et cetera, et cetera. You're not wrong. Translate hey, make sure you have a tavern. That I actually have that in my session 1 stuff as well. It doesn't have to be a tavern, but it better be a bar.
Yep.
In far future, there's a reason that the bar on Deep Space Nine is such an important place. There's a reason why 10 Forward is important on the Enterprise. There's a reason, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's still going to be central hubs of socialization and communication.
Yeah.
So everything we're talking about, we were leaning fantasy mainly because I was talking about my personal setting too much. And I do have science fiction settings I can talk too much about too.
Yeah.
But not today.
Well, and one of the most important things about those taverns, bars, and inns that are a main staple in all fantasy, regardless if it's sci-fi or medieval fantasy or any of the ones between, is that it's not a formal information hub. It's an informal information hub. It's where people go to have fun and unload. And so more information is exchanged freely because there isn't a sense of a rapport between various people. Like even in like the Star Trek universe, usually in the bar, they all just kind of talk around as equals until they're back out to a degree.
And even in the real world, that's very often where they'll have a bulletin board.
Yeah.
Like if there's a bounty board in a town, it's not going to be out in the square. It's going to be in a tavern or in the town hall. And again, as we pointed out before, the tavern or inn is the town hall until they build one.
Yep.
Which they may never do.
So take all this and realize whatever setting you're trying to build a world for, or worlds, if you've got like a Star Trek, Star Wars thing with multiple planets, all this still applies and can help you lean towards that because it all boils down to the same basic things. Even those, outer space worlds have government, culture, religion, foods,
geography that shapes all those things, ecological pressures, what the monsters are, etc. It's just as important that a crate dragon is out there as a blue dragon.
Yeah. And I would even argue that doing multiple planets is a little bit simpler because you can categorize them by type. And it's simpler, especially if you take the Star Wars method. It's pretty simple, I should say.
It's a forest planet.
Yeah.
Yeah. At least a desert planet makes sense. You can have a whole planet without water. Why would a whole planet be a single biome if it has water and biology at all?
Yeah.
But for those of you watching now or later, if you think you would like a different conversation, different random encounter about like sci-fi worlds or outer space or advanced technology, we're more than happy to do that too. So drop a comment, to us on Twitter, any of us, or in YouTube. This will be up there later on, and just let us know what you want to see. And
with one caveat, we will never do an edition wars.
True.
Yeah.
Like I'm not part of their group, but I agree with that statement and I respect it. Play what you enjoy. Every system, every system, every edition of every system works for some groups and not others, and is better for different things.
Yep.
There's no reason to fight about it, guys.
Yep.
Mhm. Totally.
All right. Can't really end on a better note than what Jack just said. So thanks for watching, everybody. Thanks, Brian, once again for joining us as always. Thank you, Jack, for jumping in and sharing all of your expertise.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me. It's been fun.
Yeah, this has been a blast. That's kind of why it's gone a little longer, and I haven't worried too much about cutting off the information. But hopefully we'll do something again. And if you're following us and not either of these two, you should fix that on any kind of platform, because like all the information that came out here just is amazing. And Brian, by the way, does not have a bias towards horror at all. Like none. There is no horror bias to Brian.
That's like saying I don't have a bias towards grim, dark settings.
I also do not have a bias toward horror.
Never. Not once.
Just because out of the 5 or 6 alternate ecologies I've done, it's been illithids, aboleth, werewolf.
Yeah.
My next
I love
one's
aboleth.
vampires.
All right.
And that's all cosmic horror. I have a whole thing on the forum. But what I wanted to say is call me back for the sci-fi one.
Yeah,
for sure.
Definitely.
Absolutely.
Definitely. All right. Thanks for tuning in for this long or watching on VOD. And we'll see you next time, everybody.
Heck yeah. Stay legendary,
Take it easy.
folks. Bye.